We want all sides to come together in peace and harmony. We can do it. We can do it. We can do it. It'll happen. Those engaged in the political arena must stop treating political opponents as being morally defective. Have to do that.
Given the curve that we grade on now, that was President Trump sounding, well, reasonable and measured. But then he couldn't help himself, and he said this.
As part of a larger national effort to bridge our divides and bring people together, the media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories. Have to do it. Have to do it.
Okay, so here is what the White House press secretary Sarah Sanders had to say about that fact here and who's to blame, with the president obviously pointing a finger directly at the media.
The very first thing that the president did was come out and condemn the violence. The very first thing your network did was come out and accuse the president of being responsible for it. That is not okay. The first thing should have been to condemn the violence.
But, first of all, that isn't the case, because she was talking to a CNN reporter, and if you were watching CNN at the time, immediately when they had to evacuate the building, they were going over the developments and not the politics. That came much later in the day. But regardless, what you didn't hear there from Sanders or from Trump was complaining about the right-wing media. And listen, if you will, to what Tucker Carlson in prime time was saying on Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, probably the largest megaphone on radio, what they and others were saying in their reaction to the attempted bombings.
Donald Trump used the name George Soros for the first time in his presidency, and the guy had a pipe bomb in his mailbox last night. And we're talking about whether or not Sarah Sanders gets her Cornish hen.
Put a pipe bomb in George Soros' mailbox?
Why do you think they did? You think it's just coincidence?
Criticized George Soros,
because
the richest
Donald
people in the world.
Donald Trump runs around.
No, because George Soros.
Don't laugh.
Republicans just don't do this kind of thing. And if a Democrat operative's purpose here is to make it look like, hey, you know, there are mobs everywhere. The mobs are not just Democrat mobs.
Trust me, the false flags that were coming off on conservative media, I could do the whole program on, but you get the drift. However, they did not speak for all Republicans. In fact, many Republicans didn't find any of what you saw funny. Steve Schmidt, he ran John McCain's presidential campaign, and he sent out the following tweet. Trump has stoked a cold civil war in this country. His rallies brim with menace, and he has labeled journalists as enemies of the people. That someone would seek to kill their political enemies is not aberrational, but rather the inevitable consequence of Trump's incitement. Plus, more than 200 journalists, they've signed a letter condemning the president for attacking the media and creating a lot of the environment that we find ourselves in right now. They also say he's inciting violence. Exhibit 1 is the president praising a Republican congressman who body slammed a reporter. And again, this in the past month. Take a listen.
Greg is smart. And by the way, never wrestle him. You understand that? Never. Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind of... He's my guy. I had heard that he body slammed a reporter. And I said, oh, this is terrible. He's going to lose the election. Then I said, well, wait a minute. I know Montana pretty well. I think it might help him. And it did.
By the way, the congressman in question was charged by the police, pled no contest, because he body slammed a reporter for the temerity of the reporter to ask him a question about health care. Anyway, I digress. Washington Post columnist Dana Milbank wrote a piece about that today and the president's response to the bombs. Quote, Trump appropriately denounced acts or threats of political violence of any kind, but it's fair to ask, if a person who assaults a journalist is Trump's guy, might not some unstable person think that by sending a pipe bomb to news organizations, he too is being Trump's guy? And here's President Trump's latest tweet on the incidents. Quote, a very big part of the anger we see today in our society is caused by the purposely false and inaccurate reporting of the mainstream media that I refer to as fake news. It has gotten so bad and hateful that it's beyond description. Mainstream media must clean up its act fast. All right, let me bring in our panel right now. Richard Brodsky, he's a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman from Westchester and a professor at NYU. Richard St. Paul, a Republican strategist and former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association. And the only non-Richard at the table, Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. You know, we kid around a lot in the last couple of years or just shake our head at the craziness that we've never heard another president say, I don't care the political party. But there has been, from my vantage point at least, a palpable increasing fear that this is going to lead to something really bad. And then we see assassination attempts with these bombs that were sent out, now to more than 10 locations. This did not happen in a vacuum, Richard. This is not completely unforeseeable. And forget the president blaming the news and all the rest. For him to have zero acknowledgement of culpability or responsibility, and I put the press secretary in this, but I mean, not that I expected anything more from him at this point, but this is going to end bad. I just have a bad feeling, and I want to be wrong.
There's a certain childlike innocence about your consistent capacity to be surprised. This is what he does. Historically, when these things happen, I don't care if it's the attempts on Lincoln's life, the successful ones, or Kennedy's, there is a resonance in the larger community, a welcoming vibe that empowers crazy people to do crazy things. For him, he's not going to take responsibility for it. He's going to actually use it to advance his agenda, and the rest of us have to figure out the responses. When you get people like even Hillary saying we're going to go low when they go low, you realize how serious the deterioration of the political fabric has been. And it cannot, it's up to the victim and the good guy to take the moral higher ground and leave Trump to stew in his own juices.
Well, in fact, he did blame the victim. CNN had a bomb delivered to them, and he's blaming them for, I'm sorry, a president who now I think is approaching 4,500 lies since he's been in office, right?
He's over 5,000.
Over 5,000. I'm sorry. Again, I'm grading on a curve. So, and he hates an organization who reports the facts on him or the latest for the... Okay, Richard, and I'm not making you the fall guy for this, but the president has done something I've never seen any other elected official do. He literally has turned an entire party, and the entire party's orthodoxy, and it has made the party about himself, and for whatever reason, they've gone along. At what point do you think that the party, by tolerating it, has been complicit in some way in the coarsening and how toxic and really angry things have gotten? And I think we'll agree the one major variable is the guy sitting on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Look, I think there has to be civility on both sides. Let us not forget not too long ago that there were multiple assassination attempts on multiple congressmen playing a softball game, and that was someone who, those were Republican congressmen. Let us not forget Maxine Waters, Congressman Maxine Waters talking about, you know, attack Trump supporters.
Totally different.
Yeah.
That's people confronting. That's people confronting politicians at restaurants. Let's.
You know what?
Let's stay in our lanes.
No, that is the lane that you should not. She basically told them people it's
you're
okay
people
to attack them.
You're equating people who are standing up to members of Congress at restaurants with people who put pipe bombs in mailboxes. That's what you're doing right now, Richard.
I'm attacking civility and saying that both parties are responsible for civility.
But here's my question, though, Richard. I've heard that.
There's been
violence
from Democratic fanatics,
is there an
and we don't even know who this is in terms of pipe bombs.
My only point to you is, we don't, okay? But are you making an equivalence between what the president has done, the guy with the biggest soapbox in the world, okay, and a congresswoman out in California, or are we making that equal? Are we in some way saying all the kids are doing it? You're not putting more accountability on the president?
No. Every Congressman Maxine Waters and anybody of her stature, including the president, are elected officials, duly elected by the people, meaning that they should be focusing on doing things that are good for the people, not on attacking each other.
Is what Trump did equivalent to what Waters did? Is what Trump has done.
Did he tell people to go out and attack people in their private settings?
Answer my question, I'll answer yours.
What is Trump doing? What has he done?
Well,
what are we talking about?
Body slamming the reporter in Montana? They're the enemies of the people?
No.
No. Are they
the press are not the enemies of the people. We know that. Many Republicans have spoke out and said that that's not true. Secondly, body slamming, promoting body slamming reporters is not a good idea, and not good either.
Is what Waters did equivalent to what Trump did?
It is equivalent in the sense that it does not speak to civility. Yes, it is equivalent. No sin is greater than the other. Whether you stole something or killed somebody, under the Bible,
murder is
a
worse
sin is
than
a
theft,
sin.
Richard.
Under the Bible, a sin is a sin. Non-civility is non-civility, no matter how good, not how minor or how major it is.
Completely through the looking glass here? Are we completely, seriously? You're saying the people confronting members of Congress at restaurants is somehow the equivalent of somebody putting a pipe bomb in a mailbox?
I'm not saying
that. That the words of a congresswoman who represents 780,000 people in California is somehow equivalent to a president of the United States who represents 320 million people and gets the spotlight every single day? It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
When people are acting
here's my other problem with the
what these
president
leaders
right
are
now.
saying.
Let's put aside, if we can, whether he contributed to the cause of all this. What's he doing as president after the assassination attempt of 2 former presidents, a Secretary of State, an Attorney General, etc., to try to bring people back together? He's talking in this lolly voice that he's reading off a teleprompter last night. We know when this president is talking from the heart and when he's talking seriously and when he's trying to motivate people. We see it at his rallies all the time. He couldn't put the same level of energy into trying to bring peace into this nation as he could about trying to stoke those fears and divide the country yesterday.
There's a great danger in whataboutism, and you're the exponent and the apostle of whataboutism. Instead of dealing with what the conversation is, you correctly sometimes say, well, what about you guys? Now, that's a good tactic in TV, and that's why you're here. But it's not a way to conduct a country's business.
It's something very small, just a small thing I got to break. He never even mentioned. He hasn't picked up a phone. He hasn't even talked to former presidents. I mean, and who does he blame? He blames the media when CNN had to be evacuated today after the president has called him the enemy of the people. Now, I know, I'm not naive as much as Richard thinks. I knew he wasn't going to own this today, okay? And maybe he shouldn't own it completely. He certainly is a part of it. But not one person in this country believes down deep that the president really feels horrible for people being targeted. He thinks it's all part of the reality show gotcha game. And I'm worried, thank God no one got hurt here, but I'm worried that we haven't put a punctuation on this story by any means. I'm not talking the investigation. I'm talking about more of this stuff. I got to hit a break. I'm sorry. When we come back, really interesting perspective on this, a history lesson. Why what's happening today can be traced back a long line of political attacks and divisive strategies, and they all led to an election of one Donald J. Trump. Stay with us.